The last time anyone saw Emily Carter was on a rainy Friday night. The neon lights of Grady's diner flickered against the wet pavement as she stepped outside, tightening her red hoodie around her to shield herself from the cold drizzle. It was just past midnight, and the streets of Brookhaven, North Carolina, were nearly deserted. The town, known for its quiet charm, was the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked and knew their neighbors by name. But that night, something felt off. Security camera footage from the diner's parking lot showed Emily pausing under the awning, pulling out her phone. The glow from the screen illuminated her face, a brief flicker of hesitation crossing her features. Then she waved at someone off camera, a friendly wave, not a desperate one. She stepped forward, past the reach of the cameras, and that was the last recorded moment of Emily Carter. By morning, she was gone. Sarah Mitchell, Emily's best friend, was the first to notice something was wrong. Emily was reliable, the kind of person who never left a text unanswered for too long, but when Sarah's messages remained unread, she grew uneasy. By the afternoon, she drove over to Emily's apartment, where she was met with eerie silence. The door was locked, the windows shut. Inside, everything was in its place: her purse, car keys, even an untouched cup of coffee still sitting on the kitchen counter. The only sign of distress was Cooper, Emily's golden retriever, who paced anxiously by the door, whining softly. Then came the biggest clue. Emily's phone was found a block away, lying in a storm drain, its screen shattered. A group of kids playing nearby had noticed it that morning, but no one had thought much of it. Until now. Detective Ryan Caldwell was called in that evening. A seasoned investigator, he knew that in cases like these, every second counted. He examined the evidence carefully, the phone, the apartment, the security footage. Something wasn't adding up. Emily Carter had vanished into thin air, and the few clues they had only deepened the mystery. And then came the most chilling realization. Emily's car was still parked just 2 blocks away. Engine off, keys missing. Emily never made it home. Detective Ryan Caldwell had seen too many missing persons cases. Some ended in happy reunions, but most didn't. And the ones that started like this, no signs of a struggle, a phone discarded, a car abandoned, those were the worst. Emily Carter had been missing for less than 24 hours, but already the case felt like it was slipping through his fingers. Time was the enemy now. The longer someone was gone, the lower the chances of bringing them home alive. His first stop was Emily's apartment. Nothing inside looked out of place. Her bed was still unmade, a sign she had expected to return. Her half-empty coffee cup sat on the counter, the liquid inside long since gone cold. The only oddity was Cooper, her golden retriever, who kept pawing at the door, whining as if he expected her to walk in at any moment. The storm drain where Emily's phone had been found yielded no additional clues. No blood, no signs of a struggle, but the fact that the screen was shattered suggested it hadn't simply been dropped. Someone had thrown it, likely to make sure she couldn't call for help. The biggest mystery, however, was her car. Parked just 2 blocks from her apartment, locked and undisturbed. If she had been taken, why not from there? And why was it parked facing the opposite direction of her home, as if she had intended to go somewhere else that night? Then came the only potential lead, a witness. Mrs. Lillian Dawson, an elderly woman who lived across the street from the parking lot, had seen something unusual the night before. She told the police that around midnight she had noticed a black sedan idling nearby. The engine was running for several minutes, but she never saw anyone get in or out. When she looked again, it was gone. A black sedan, no license plate number, no other details. It wasn't much, but it was something. Later that evening, as Sarah scrolled through social media, she hesitated when a message popped up from an unknown account. The profile had no picture, no name, nothing. Just a single message. "You're looking in the wrong place." Sarah's blood ran cold. Sarah sat on Emily's bed, staring at the cryptic message on her phone. "You're looking in the wrong place." Who had sent it, and what did it mean? She took a shaky breath and decided to do what Emily would have done, look deeper. If the police were missing something, she had to find it. Emily was always careful about her privacy, but Sarah knew her better than anyone. If Emily had secrets, they'd be hidden in the one place she kept things locked away, her closet. Sliding open the door, Sarah sifted through the neatly hung clothes, the stacked shoe boxes, the shelf of old books. Nothing seemed out of place. But when she ran her hand along the back wall, she felt something. A small latch, barely noticeable. With a gentle tug, a hidden compartment popped open. Inside was a small metal box. Sarah hesitated, her fingers trembling as she flipped the latch and opened it. Newspaper clippings, at least a dozen, each one detailing the disappearances of young women from different states over the past 5 years. Some of the cases had been solved, bodies found, families left grieving. Others were still open investigations, unsolved mysteries with no leads. Emily had been looking into them. But why? Sarah's breath caught when she found a photograph buried beneath the clippings. It was an old picture taken years ago. In it, Emily stood next to a man in a military uniform, smiling. His name was stitched on his chest: Michael R. Davis. Sarah didn't recognize him. She flipped the picture over. He's still out there. Her heart pounded. Who was this man? What was Emily involved in? The more Sarah thought about it, the more things clicked into place. Emily had always been passionate about true crime, always researching cold cases in her spare time. But this was different. This was personal. Sarah grabbed her phone and searched for Michael R. Davis. What she found made her stomach drop. Michael Davis had been dishonorably discharged from the Army under suspicious circumstances. Worse, he had been the prime suspect in the disappearance of his ex-fiancée 5 years ago. But he was never charged. Sarah's hands shook as she realized the horrifying truth. Emily hadn't just vanished. She had been hunted. Detective Ryan Caldwell leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples as he stared at the case files spread across his desk. The name Michael R. Davis was one he recognized immediately. It sent a chill through him. Michael had been a ghost, slipping through the cracks of the justice system for years. His military record was spotless, until it wasn't. After being dishonorably discharged under vague psychological concerns, he had lived under different aliases, moving from state to state. And now Emily Carter was missing. Sarah, barely able to keep her voice steady, showed Caldwell the metal box she had found in Emily's closet. He flipped through the clippings, his frown deepening. "This isn't just a coincidence," he muttered. She was looking into him. "But why?" Sarah asked. "She never mentioned him before." Caldwell sighed. Maybe she found something she wasn't supposed to. Digging deeper, they uncovered a disturbing pattern. Everywhere Michael had lived, women had gone missing. His ex-fiancée in Texas, a college student in Georgia, a young mother in Kentucky. None of the cases were officially connected, but the similarities were undeniable. Then came the most alarming discovery. Michael had been living in Brookhaven for the past 6 months under the alias James Reynolds, and he had moved out just days after Emily disappeared. Caldwell's hands clenched into fists. He knew what this meant. Michael had her. The team worked fast, tracking his last known movements. Credit card transactions led them to a gas station off a rural highway where security footage showed Michael alone, buying supplies, rope, duct tape, bottled water. It was clear he was holding Emily somewhere. Then, a break in the case. Rental records showed that James Reynolds had recently leased a remote cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains. The lease ended abruptly last week, but there was no record of him returning the keys. Sarah's gut twisted. "That's where he took her." Caldwell grabbed his phone. "We move now." As the team prepared for the raid, Sarah swallowed hard, praying they weren't too late. The sun had barely begun to rise as Detective Caldwell's team approached the remote cabin deep in the Blue Ridge Mountains. The drive had been long and tense, winding through narrow roads surrounded by thick trees. Every second felt like an eternity. Inside one of the SUVs, Sarah sat gripping her phone, her hands clammy. She wasn't supposed to be here. The police had told her to stay behind. But she refused. Emily was her best friend. If something happened to her, Sarah needed to know. As the tactical team moved into position, Caldwell whispered into his radio, "Eyes on the cabin, no movement, preparing to breach." The cabin was small, its wooden exterior worn and weathered. The windows were covered with thick curtains, making it impossible to see inside. A single car sat parked out front. A black sedan. Sarah's stomach twisted. It was the same kind of car the old woman had seen outside Emily's apartment. Caldwell gave the signal. The front door burst open as officers stormed inside, weapons raised. Sarah held her breath, listening. For a few agonizing seconds there was silence. Then, "Claire, we got her." Sarah didn't wait. She ran inside, her heart hammering. The sight made her knees nearly buckle. Emily was there, tied to a chair in the middle of the cabin. Her face was bruised, her wrists red and raw from the tight restraints. Her clothes were dirty, her hair disheveled. But her eyes, wide and terrified, focused on Sarah the second she entered. Sarah rushed forward, helping an officer untie the ropes. "Emily, oh my God, you're okay!" Emily let out a shaky breath, barely able to speak. He's gone." Caldwell spun toward the back door, which was wide open. A broken window suggested how Michael had escaped. "Damn it," Caldwell growled. "He was just here." A radio crackled. No sign of him in the woods. He could be anywhere. Emily clung to Sarah, trembling. "He knew you were coming." The words chilled Sarah to her core. Michael Davis had slipped through their fingers, and if history had taught them anything, it was that he wouldn't stop. Emily sat in the back of an ambulance, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Her hands still trembled as she clutched a cup of hot coffee, though she wasn't drinking it. The rescue had been a miracle, but the nightmare wasn't over. Michael Davis was still out there. Detective Caldwell paced nearby, barking orders into his radio. Roadblocks were already in place. Every officer in the county was on high alert. A man like Michael wouldn't just disappear. He had a plan. He always did. Sarah sat beside Emily, squeezing her hand. "You're safe now," she whispered. Emily shook her head. "Not until he's caught." She looked up at Caldwell, her voice steadier than before. "You need to check his past, the places he's been before. He doesn't just run, he hides." Caldwell nodded, already thinking the same thing. He turned to one of his officers. "Get me everything on Davis, every known alias, every old address. Start with the last place he lived before Brookhaven." Minutes later, an answer came. "Sir, we just pulled a lead from his last known residence. A storage unit, rented under the name James Reynolds." Caldwell's gut twisted. Storage units weren't just for belongings, they were for hiding things. Sarah saw the tension in his face. "What is it?" "We might have just found his next move." They moved fast, arriving at the storage facility on the outskirts of town. It was the kind of place people forgot about. Silent, rows of identical metal doors, no security cameras. The air was thick with anticipation as Caldwell and his team approached Unit 46. The lock had been cut. The door was slightly ajar. Caldwell signaled for his team to move in. Weapons raised, they stepped inside. The sight made Sarah gasp. The unit was a makeshift hideout. Maps pinned to the walls, burner phones lined up on a workbench, photos of different women scattered across the table. Then, at the center of it all, a picture of Emily, freshly printed.